All right. So here we go. So this is interesting because I wasn't necessarily thinking, all right, I'm going to do another study. But obviously Tim is down for the count. He is flat on his back. He can't walk or stand up more than a minute. So I'm talking to Tim this week. A couple of the guys, we went over and prayed for Tim, and I'm talking to him like, what do you think, Tim? Maybe the next 2 weeks, maybe the next 4 weeks. You want just to give him room. So we landed on maybe 4 weeks. I'm going to teach for 4 weeks. So if you want to take a nice long vacation, feel free and come back when Tim arrives. But I won't be offended. But I'm thinking all along going into that meeting, God is putting the book of Job on my mind. Our pastor's under it. Obviously, it's the book of suffering. We all kind of have sort of a quick, I know what Job's about. It's about suffering. So I can stick that one over there and not worry about it. But I was already kind of thinking and diving into it. So we're going to do 4 weeks in the book of Job, I think. I'm going to go as fluidly as I can through it. And just so you guys can kind of know, that's what's coming for the next several weeks. We're going to dive through a 42-chapter book in 4 weeks, which is fun because I'm a macro. I look at things on a macro level, and God's given me the ability to synthesize somehow and help it be understandable. So that's where we're going to go, and I hopefully after a month, you'll be totally dialed in and you'll understand Job. That's my heart. That's my goal. So we'll go to the ideas of Job, and what is facing us when we approach the book of Job is the advantage that we have in reading Job is that we see the background because God gives us insight into the heavenly scene of what's going on prior to Job landing at the side of a fire pit and ashes with a potter's chunk of clay, and he's scraping boils off of his arms, his whole body, and he's lost everything. So if we just started so let's go to chapter 2. If we just started at verse 7, because this is kind of where Job starts. Now, chapter 1, he's already lost all of his kids. In one day, he's lost all of his kids, all of the livestock, all of his wealth. Everything is just like nuked. Like nuclear bomb hits him all in one day, one messenger after another. And if that isn't bad enough, we have a window of time where another day arrives, and in the middle of chapter 2, verse 7, it says, Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with painful boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And the next thing we know, he's taking a chunk of broken pottery that has kind of a sharp edge to it. And it's all he can do to sit in a pile of ashes and just scrape himself to somehow relieve some of the pain or some of the ooze, whatever it is. It's like it sounds really gross. But this is where we meet Job. And he is in the end, he is in the thick, he is in the hurt, he's in the mess of affliction. Now we can read the prior 40 verses or so and kind of get a sense from our helicopter view in hindsight, oh, well, God's got a plan. I see God doing something. But Job didn't have that, did he? Job is in it. And sometimes we're in it without the background. And I think when we're in it without the background, we have to have the mindset of there's got to be something more than just the pain that I'm in. The pain that I'm in is never without purpose in God's world. In God's economy, He will use everything, every event, every element in your life for an intended end. So I want you to flip over to James chapter 5. James chapter 5, inspired by the Holy Spirit. James is, of course, the half-brother of Jesus. Whether they ever just kind of kicked around the story of Job or not, as boys in the house, I don't know. But James is the only place where Job is mentioned in the New Testament. And when James speaks of Job, It's chapter 5, verse 11. It's in the context of patience and persevering. But chapter 5, verse 11. Indeed, we count them blessed who endure. You've heard of the perseverance or the patience of Job, and you've seen the intended end. The end intended by the Lord. And here's the conclusion of the book of Job, if you didn't know this. This is what you need to have on your heading. The book of Job is not about Job. What's it about? It's about the compassion and mercy of God. Now that doesn't compute, does it? Hard affliction and challenging things in Job's life, no explanation in the entire book. It's not explained. All the way to chapter 42, God doesn't give him an explanation for what happened. There's no reason why his first 10 children died in a house in one event, all 10 kids. God doesn't explain that. We don't have any resolution with his wife saying, just curse God and die. Will you be done with it? Stop holding on to your integrity. Move on. The pain's too much. Can we just stop with this charade? That's where she was at. That's how we're left with his wife. His friends are like, Job, you know you're hiding it. It's obvious. God doesn't deal with the wicked any other way than this. This is how the wicked are dealt with. You need to confess. You're hiding something. So his counselors, his friends, are pressing him. His wife has deserted him. His kids are lost. His wealth is gone. His health is gone. And he's in a circle of ashes scraping himself. And he doesn't know what happened prior to this situation. And God never explains it as we get to the end of the book. But James gives us insight. And James says, the book of Job's patience on the one hand, yeah, but the point of the book is actually the compassion and mercy of God. So when I say, all right, if I'm going to read a 42-chapter book about a guy who's suffering from chapter 1 on, and there's no explanation, how is God merciful? How is God compassionate in that? And I would say, good question. Except that his ways are not my ways. His ways are past my finding out. And often he's accomplishing things in people through hard things that I have no idea are actually taking place under the surface and going deeper and deeper. So I have an interesting quote from Charles Spurgeon. He says, patience is a pearl which is only found in the deep seas of affliction. The type of patience that Job absorbs into his life will only come through deep affliction. And then I think, do I want that type of patience? Because I don't know if I want to go through the affliction, right? I think I'll just step away from praying for patience. I'll pray for joy, right? I'll pray for something altogether different. And in this, it just like rattles me a little bit. Because deep affliction is never something we choose on our own, is it? We're going to take the exit before we see the affliction sign out in the front. Affliction coming 2 miles away, I'm jumping off and I'm taking the country road. I'm not going to continue into that. And oftentimes this is the case. Given the opportunity, I'm going to dodge it because that's my flesh. My flesh likes comfort. My flesh likes ease. My flesh likes to have its way and be able to shift to the next comfortable thing. But God says, Isaiah 48, he said, I'm trying you as silver and fine gold in a furnace of affliction. There's gold and there's silver and there's beauty that will begin being purified through a furnace of affliction oftentimes that we would never choose for ourselves. So in a context of an eternal perspective, do I want these 80 years to be soft and easy, without affliction, but with no eternal weight of glory? Or is it okay to trust that God will take me through the right things to accomplish the right purposes, to then give me an eternal weight of glory as a reward for enduring and walking out what He called me to walk out. So these are big topics. When we get into Job, they're huge topics. We have the idea of Satan entering into a conversation with God in heaven twice. We see that. We're like, oh, wow, I didn't even know about that. Like, wasn't Satan like banished? But he can come into God's presence anytime and just chat it up. That's sort of like, oh, I didn't realize that's the case. Then we have, where is Satan's perspective of mankind? He has two main issues against Job, and actually against God, that are his reasons for provoking God to allow him to strike Job. Satan says, well, Job is a mercenary. You've essentially given him everything. He's just in it for the goods. Take it all away and he'll curse you to your face. That was the first argument, and that didn't work. Second argument is, well, you've put a hedge around him, you protected him. And actually, skin for skin, he's going to always want to survive. Self-preservation is the rule of man, is what Satan says. Take away his health and he'll curse you to your face. So it's like he's either a mercenary or he's only going to want to self-preserve. So these are kind of two main arguments that Satan will use. And he'll tend to use them in us too. He'll use that against us. Take away everything. Can you still follow God? Take away all the ease and the comfort. Are you still yielded fully to what God has for you? Take away all of the strength, all of the physical ability, all of the physical health of your life, and you're withered to nothing all the way to the bottom. Are you still able to draw from God's strength? Are you still able to turn to Him without cursing Him? Interesting questions, aren't they? Do you want to find out? No, I don't. Honestly, I don't. I'm afraid what I would find out, because I'm afraid I would wilt. I'm afraid I would be crushed under it. And in some respects, would we be deceiving ourselves if we all didn't, like, in some ways understand that the flesh will want to rise up in that situation? Man, where are we at spiritually to survive it? So that's my setup. Hopefully it's a setup that kind of stirs you to, I want to know more about this. Because the book is interesting because the way it's kind of laid out, it's almost like you're approaching a Shakespearean play. Because we kind of have three main acts. We have the initial introduction and the situation in heaven that results in the decimation of Job's life. That's Act 1. Then we have Act 2, which is the intervening from chapter 3 to chapter 37. This intervening section where Job's friends are in this cyclical conversation and dialogue. They'll take turns like slinging arrows at him pretty much, and he's like got the shoot him. He's like, no, it's you guys. You're wrong. God is this and that. And in all of that, that's like a 34 chapters of what God ends up saying in chapter 38. Who are these guys who confuse wise counsel? What are you guys talking about? So then the final frame then is from 38 to 42, where God comes in and says, let's set the record straight. And then God proclaims His majesty over the entire creation and takes these guys in there. It's almost like they're walking around and the world is an ant farm, and they're the big topic in the discussion, to where the roles reverse and all of a sudden they're the ant farm and God's now the big topic in the discussion. Where God says, I'm going to make your problems evaporate in my presence and in my majesty. And at the end of it, Job was like, whoa, I've only heard of you, but now I've seen you. Now I know. And it blows my mind, and woe is me. So he hits the deck and he repents. So that's the summation of it. There's a lot that's going to happen. We're going to skim in the next couple weeks. We certainly can't go through it verse by verse. But in the overall, if you have a quick outline of it, chapters 1 and 2 are the destruction of Job's circumstance. Chapter 3 through 37 are the discussion of Job's circumstance. And chapter 38 to 42 is the dismissal of Job's circumstance, and it's God. God is, in God's majesty. So that's a quick, just off the top of my head, a quick outline for the whole book, three sections. But today I want to kind of run through chapters 1 and 2 to some degree. So let's look at chapter 1. We'll go back and just kind of start at the beginning. We're going to be given an introduction to the character and the man who is Job. It's likely that this took place around the time of Abraham. Job would have been one of the wealthy patriarchs of the ancient times, kind of in that window of time around Abraham. Just so you can kind of get it in your mind. And it wouldn't have been over in the Chaldees. It's sort of north of what we now know as Jerusalem, probably up in that region. That's where Uz historically was located. So there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And that man was blameless and upright. He was one who feared God and shunned evil. That's good. I want God to say that about me. I want that to be the epitaph on my life, so to speak. So he's an admirable guy right out of the gate. It seems like he's a faithful man in that sense. And he had 7 sons, 3 daughters were born to him. Also his possessions were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, a very large household. The household would have been all the servants that were taking care of the farm and the animals and all of that. So in this time, he would be an employee, essentially. He has people who can't own land, who necessarily can't own property or animals, but their job then is to live in Job's household and take care of his. And that's how ancient cultures kind of worked. So Job is essentially he's an employer of a huge amount of people. He has a lot of wealth represented in these animals. And so that he was one of the greatest of all the people of the East. His sons would go and feast in their houses. Louis, can you turn down the monitor a little bit? It's like echoing in my head. I can't hear myself. Thank you. So it was when the feast days had run their course. Let's see. The sons would go and they would feast in their houses, each on his appointed day, and they would send and invite 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. So this is prior. Imagine this is prior to the Mosaic Law. We don't have the feast days incorporated in the Mosaic Law, but there are certain, times where they would celebrate whatever season it was, harvest time. Those were kind of similar. So whatever the case, there are certain feast days that the boys would get together, and they would gather a group of people, and the girls would come over with them, their sisters. So this was kind of a common thing among the family. And they would drink with them, eat with them. So it was when the days of the feast had run their course that Job would send, and he would sanctify them. He would check on them. He was like, are they okay? Are they doing good? Have they done anything radically out of line? Like he's worried about their uprightness. He's a good parent. They're adults, but he's still concerned and still engaged. So take note as a parent. Be engaged, be concerned. You can still enter into your kids' lives as they become adults. And there's room for that. Not lording over them, but being engaged. So Job would sin, he would sanctify, and then he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, it may be that something happened, they maybe sinned and cursed God during the feast in their heart even, and he was concerned for them, so he did this regularly. So Job is interceding for his kids. He sees this abundance in their life. He sees the affluence they have and how it can kind of maybe turn their heart. He's concerned. He prays for them. That's good. So this is kind of a snapshot of the course of Job's life. This might be a regular, in a micro, of what's a regular process of his life on a weekly, monthly, yearly basis. And then this is the interesting phrase, I think, in chapter 1 and 2. Now there was a day. 3 times this phrase is used, now there was a day. What does a day bring in a person's life? I've asked it before. Joseph woke up in the jailer's cell, but by the end of that day, he was second in command under Pharaoh. What does a day bring in your life? It could be a day where you're elevated beyond any expectation. It could be a day where you're brought so low, you're broken and humbled and crushed. But there was a day. Don't take it for granted. Don't take the breath of your life for granted. God can do amazing things in a day, and crushing things can happen in a day. So this is kind of just a random, there was a day. But in Job's life, it wasn't just a random there was a day. Because this random there was a day began a process of soul-crushing events that he had no idea was coming. But there was a day. And we don't know what a day holds for us. So treat every day as a blessing and thank God for it. And say, Lord, today I'm yours. Today, let today be that day of glorifying Him. So, here we go into the discussion. And there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. The Lord said to Satan, where do you come from? Satan answered the Lord and said, I'm going around the earth to and fro, checking stuff out. Now, it's interesting. Did you ever know that God and Satan had conversations like this? Does this kind of startle you a little bit? Understand what we're going to see. Satan has already rebelled because the fall has already happened. Satan still maintains access to God's presence. Even now, even after the cross, he still maintains access to God's presence. We're told in Revelation 12 that he's actually the accuser of the brethren in the presence of God. He's right now accusing me and you. We have an intercessor, though. We have a defense attorney that speaks on our behalf. We don't have to fear the accusations of this enemy of our soul. But the reality is, he has audience with the Father. And that startles me some. But his audience with the Father is in the context of what Jesus says in John, that he's the father of lies, though. And he's a murderer from the beginning. So his intent is always to bring harm to those who love God. Because he hates everything about God and what God is. But God gives him audience even now. We're told in Revelation 12 that he's going to be cast out. And that's coming, but it hasn't happened yet. So consider that. He has an audience. He's defanged. Colossians tells us that he's been made an open mockery as far as his ability to do anything to us. He's been declawed. He's been defanged. He can simply yell really loud and roar really loud like a lion. And it's a lot of bluster at this point because Jesus has taken away any hold he has on us. So go free in that. But understand there's still a voice accusing you before the Father. But Jesus has interceded for you. He's spoken on your behalf. But for Job right here, Job doesn't know any of this is going on. We have the ability to read it and get some insight and understand what happened that brought this about. Because Job is sitting there in the ash heap, and that's his question. Why? What's going on? There was a book years ago that was written that was titled, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. You ever heard that title? There was a whole craze across the country trying to explain, aren't good people insulated from bad things happening? Isn't that our expectation? Sometimes people follow and say they're a Christian as an insurance policy only, because I don't want bad things to happen to me. I don't want that affliction. I want to be able to say, hey, I love God, so nothing bad should ever happen to me. It's kind of a false mindset. Jesus obviously said, I and the Father are one, and he was the one that was crucified. So bad things happen to the best people. Very bad things happen to the most innocent person. So these are kind of context things that I think it stirs my mind to thinking a little bit like, okay, so that's kind of false. I don't want to go through my day thinking, oh, this bad thing happened, God let me down. That's not true. If a bad thing happened, God has something intended for it. But God didn't let you down. He already knew it was coming. So we can't go, that's like a rabbit trail that we might touch on down the road, but this is interesting. These are the only two places in the whole book where Satan is referenced, this one and then chapter 2. So he's in a way, he's a bit player, but he's the one God allows and is the instrument God allows to bring the tragedy. And that's all he wants to do anyway. He just wants to bring tragedy and move on to the next. I'm going about the world, checking stuff out, seeing who I can destroy. That's what he's saying. We're told in Peter that he's a roaring lion looking whom he can devour. He's seeking people to submarine their faith. Don't be one of those people. So God answers Satan in verse 8. Have you considered my servant Job? That there's none like him on the earth. He's blameless and upright, one who fears God and shuns evil. So it's a quote from the verse 1. That isn't just somebody's view of Job. That's actually repeated by God of Job, which is pretty radical. But the key word to underline is considered. So considered is a military term. Have you strategized? Have you studied Job in such a way that you're going to breach the walls and overtake the city of Job's life? Have you looked at him in that way? So think about an engineer who just finished his giant bridge project. He's a structural engineer. He knows everything's buttoned up, everything's right and tight. He has no doubt about the bridge. And he invites the guy to come and inspect the bridge and test the bridge. Weight load, all that stuff. This is what God is doing with Job. He's like, I know Job. Have you even studied him yet? Because he's a guy that's not going to fail, just like the engineer knows the bridge isn't going to fail. So this is where God is approaching the situation. It isn't about Job, but God's telling us a story about his nature, and Job is the bridge. The bridge doesn't know it's being tested by the inspector. The bridge is the bridge. And the one who made the bridge and fashioned the bridge knows what the bridge can handle. The one who made the bridge and fashioned the bridge knows what the bridge can handle. Don't miss that. He's not going to ever give you anything that's too much for you to bear. There's got to be comfort in that. It seems like it might be too much to bear. I can't bear it. Job gets to the point in chapter 3, verse 1. He's like, man, I wish I had never been born. I wish I'd never. Curses the day I was born. So Job is going places and voicing things, but God knows the metal of his soul. Okay? Because what we see in chapter 42 is full circle. When we talked about with Caleb a couple weeks ago, 45 years later, Caleb's like, give me the mountain. Job, after the trial, he's like, I had no idea. He hits the deck. He's repentant. He's worshiping. Job isn't holding it in bitterness that the trial God brought him through. He's rejoicing and worshiping the majesty of God at the end of it. So, woe is me if I read Job and I begin accusing God when Job wasn't at the end. Job came through it. But I'm messed up if I read it and say, God's wrong already. How's God setting Satan against Job? That's wrong. You see how easily you can kind of get tripped into that mindset? Man, it's like God's using Satan to attack Job. No. God's a bridge builder. And Job is the bridge. And he knows what he's made of. He's going to allow us to see some great lessons through the tumult that Job endures. So, and get sidetracked. So Satan answered the Lord and he said, does Job fear God for nothing? Well, of course Job fears you. You bless him with all kinds of stuff. You put a hedge about him. He never faces any difficulties. You've blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. He's a mercenary. Why don't you stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he'll surely curse you to your face. So this is Satan's accusation. This is his estimation of a man named Job. God knows Job. God's already given us, by the mouth of two witnesses, a thing is established. We have two people who say this is of Job. He's upright in heart. He shuns evil. Satan dismisses it. He's like, nah, he's a mercenary. He's just out for the goods. And you're protecting him anyway. Remove your hand and then you'll see. Then his real character will bubble to the surface and he'll actually curse you right to your face. He won't even hedge. So the Lord said to Satan, all right, go test the bridge then. Only don't harm his body. Don't touch his health. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Here's the verse. Now there was a day. So now there was a day. Job wakes up in the morning. He's out hanging out on the back porch, drinking a strawberry tea or whatever it is. But this day is going to be different than any other day. His sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, so they were having another feast. And a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them when the Sabeans raided them and took them away. Indeed, they've killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. So that's part of his household. It's the servant crew out taking care of the animals. While this first messenger was still speaking, another one came running up, and he said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep, and the servants there consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another also came running up. The Chaldeans formed 3 bands and raided the camels and took them away. They killed the servants with the edge of the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, this is a wave after wave. It's like, this is like Ali, and Fraser's just like knocking him back. And he's backstepping in. It's like one shot after another. Boom, boom, boom. He can't wrap his mind around the first loss until it's another wave of tremendous loss. And he's trying to wrap his mind around that. And then the next guy. So we're 3 in, and the 4th one comes. And he's like, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the oldest brother's house. And suddenly a great wind came across the wilderness, struck the 4 corners of the house. It fell on the young people, and they're all dead. I alone have escaped to tell you. Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, and he fell to the ground, and he worshipped. Now, this is a reflection of the character of Job that I think is phenomenal. Everything is wiped out. 10 kids in one house died. 10 kids. How long does it take for you? How long does it take for you to shave your head? Like you're getting your thoughts together a little bit. Shave your head takes a little while, I guess. I mean, a few hours, a few minutes. But at that point, man, he falls to the ground and he worships. He doesn't fall to the ground and say, why me, God? How could you, God? All of the things that we tend to sort of buckle towards. But I admire Job in this, that, man, the initial response is, all right, naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I will return. The Lord gave, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not sin, nor charge God with any wrong. It's astounding, isn't it? How's that possible? So a couple of things happen as we read through this. It's evident that the Sabians raiding the property and killing the servants, the origin of it is Satan. It's evident that the Chaldeans coming is a satanic attack through these raids. It's evident that the windstorm knocking down the building is satanic. It's a spiritual attack that does physical damage. Now, this isn't to say that every time things like that happen, it's the devil in the bush, it's the boogeyman, Satan doing it. But there are times, we know the wind on the waves, wind in the waves on the Sea of Galilee, as Jesus is getting in the boat, the guys are freaked out. He speaks and everything stops. There's an element of spiritual attack to things that we would do well to kind of consider. Is this spiritual attack? And understand the source. Rather than, oh, it's just random hard things that happen and why didn't God protect me? Oftentimes God is able to protect you, but He will allow it to run its course because He has something to accomplish. Okay? So don't get lost in the actual events. God is against me. That's wrong. God is for you. But in the events, God is going to accomplish something and He's going to let the bridge be tested because He knows the metal of your bridge. He's going to allow it. And it's not something you would choose, but He's going to allow it. But take heart. He knows you. He knows what you can handle. So here we have a sweet testimony of Job's response is worship. We had a friend up in Oregon who lost his daughter in a car accident. It was tragic. I mean, it was sad. And I think the initial, and Job is a little bit along the same lines, the initial response is always, I want to say and do and have my heart in the right spot. And I want to turn my heart to the Lord. But boy, as time went on, it just kind of swirled and hurt. And the hurt stayed. And the loss was there. And I think the initial for Job, man, he's right on the money. He's right on the money, but man, let it settle a little bit. Let the pain just kind of ooze in for a while, and that pain begins to infect. So there's an effort of drawing near. There's an effort of continuing to worship. There's an effort of continuing to deny what the flesh is going to want to do. Because the flesh is going to want to do this, blame this, and then lash out at people because they don't understand my pain. So let's watch what happens with Job now. Job he's on the money. Chapter 1, incredible chapter, but chapter 2 we see things beginning. The pressure on the pressure cooker is tightened a little bit more. The steam goes up a little bit more, okay? Again, there was a day. So that day wasn't enough. There was another day. This is the third time we see the phrase. Again, there was a day. So we don't have a time frame in between losing the kids, losing all the wealth, to this next conversation. There's no time frame. You be the judge on it. I wonder if it's a little while. Perhaps it's right away. I don't know. And maybe we don't even need to know. But it was another day to us in the reading of it. That's just a day. To Job, it wasn't just a day. It was like a watershed. Everything seemed normal to that day, and then it was all destroyed. And then there was another day when something began, and now that's the next level. So this is the next level. The sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. Sons of God would be another term for angels, the angelic realm. They're just kind of streaming by, being able to interact with the Lord. Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. The Lord said to him, "From where do you come?" He's like, going about the whole earth, walking around, checking stuff out. He's kind of dismissive, right? He doesn't really be specific because he doesn't want, well, he probably knows God knows, but he's mocking him like, well, you know, why are you asking? So I'm just going to, in that derogatory kind of he doesn't respect the authority of God, so he's going to disrespect him if he can. That's sort of what he's doing. He's not giving a straight answer, he's just kind of general. So the Lord said to Satan, have you considered, same word, have you considered my servant Job, that there's none like him on the earth, a blameless, upright man who fears God and shuns evil? And still, he holds fast to his integrity. Although you incited me against him to destroy him without cause. Is God able to be incited by anybody? He's not. He's provoked to jealousy. He's provoked to things. Satan isn't provoking or inciting God. God has a plan, and Satan just kind of walks into it. Satan thinks he incited God, but God had a plan. So don't think that God isn't actually the one calling the shots, because Satan does nothing apart from God's permission. Not only has God hedged protection around Job, God has hedged Satan into his own little world that he can't go beyond. Okay? Satan is limited based on God's allowances. So God says, what about Job? Have you considered, have you strategized? Since last time we talked, you were wrong. He holds fast. So Satan doesn't even comment on it because he lost it. He was wrong. So he goes on to his next accusation. Skin for skin. Take his life. Let his life be in jeopardy. Then he'll turn against you. Stretch out your hand now. Touch his bone and his flesh, and he'll surely curse you to your face. Second time, that's what Satan wants. So that's Satan's desire, right? His desire is not necessarily to incite God, but to incite us to curse God to his face. He wants our response to be, I'm going to curse and accuse God. Because, man, that derails our relationship with him, doesn't it? That's what Satan wants. That's his strategy and that's his desire. He wants to destroy us so that we can't draw near. Don't be rope-a-doped into that. And the Lord says, well, he's in your hand. Spare his life. Whatever you do, just spare his life. And now we get to the point where we see the verse we read. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord, and he struck Job with painful boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took for himself a broken piece of pottery with which to scrape himself while he sat in the midst of the ashes. Hard situation. Hard circumstance. And now my health is gone too, and there's no explanation. And there's no comfort. Have you ever been sunburned so bad, like everything's popping, you just have to like itch it, but it's oozing, but itching kind of helps a little bit? It's sort of weird, right? This is head to toe. And he's just like scratching with pottery, and it doesn't help. It takes his mind off of the pain, maybe. Painful boils. Sometimes the question comes, is it really necessary for all this to happen to Job? Is it really necessary? Now, in our minds, that's a valid question. But our ways are not his ways. God's ways are past finding out. And oftentimes we ask those kinds of questions that lead to the why question. And the more we ask the why, the more silent the door is that the answer would come through. Because the why becomes less and less important as we get to the end of the book. And you'll see that as we go. The why for Job isn't about what God is doing to him, but what God is accomplishing through it. And this is the lesson, you guys. God wants to walk through the journey, and He isn't necessarily only worried about the end result. It's the journey that He wants to walk with you. He wants to have you join in with Him and be comforted by Him. So, Job is interestingly sitting in a heap of ashes, that concept of mourning, ashes. I don't know what's going on. So he's surrounded by a pile of ashes. And his wife, first time we hear of him, only time we hear of her. His wife says to him, understand these are her 10 kids that died also. Right? Are you still holding fast to your integrity? When is enough enough? So Job was concerned that his kids in verse 5 may have cursed God in their merriment. Satan makes the accusation that he'll surely curse you to your face 2 times. His wife is saying, why don't you just curse God? Same word. And it's the idea of, why don't you bless God? And it's in the margin there. To bless in a wicked way. Why don't you take the Lord's name in vain? Why don't you shout at Him and just get it over with? Why are you holding fast to your integrity and maintaining this charade? Just curse God and die. No. This is not a good place to start with marriage counseling, right? Although it sounds like they maybe needed some. But you understand she's going through the same things he's going through. But we're only told about Job. So I leave Job's wife over here because there's no more comment one way or the other regarding her. But I understand she's had as much loss as he has. She just doesn't have a physical illness right now. And it's tragic for both of them. And she's heartbroken and bitter. And now I've got to take care of you with the whole boils thing on top of all the other pain. So she's like, I'm kind of done. I'm kind of over it. This is too hard. I don't know why you're still hanging in there. And then she exits. So in the concept of a Shakespeare play, she's like the bit player that comes in and has her one line, and it's like a brutal line. But you know, in terms of the home life, they've shared a lot of memories. But that's her only line in the story. Nothing else? No redemption for her at the end? No. God's concern isn't about the kids that died, which is interesting. Now, as a parent, I love my kids. But even as they're growing, even as they've grown, I have to get to a place where I recognize God's care and love for them supersedes mine. And I can let them go. I can't do this and say, but I want to make sure that everything is good for them. I want to make sure, and if God sees fit, and it's a car accident or whatever, I have to be okay. I have to be able to let it go. Because He knows the metal, the bridge builder. He knows their metal. He knows where they are more than I do. And I have to let that go. I have to let it go and not grip it. So I have to let them sail and mature and go on. And the wife is struggling with this. She's struggling with, I don't see it. And then she's out. He says to her, you speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Should we not indeed accept good from the Lord and then not also accept adversity? How can you put parameters on God like that? He's blessed us abundantly. But when hard things come, can we not accept that too? He's pretty rational there. I mean, that's a pretty rational argument back. Like, get rid of your integrity and die. What? All of the blessings of our life, and I can't accept adversity as well? That's a rattle the cage practicality from Job that would be good for us to heed. Like, okay, good and adversity. He reigns on the just and the unjust alike. There's no partiality. Everybody's under the same situation, but God will intervene in your situation if you ask Him to. He'll come in and meet you. He'll sustain you. He may not bring you out of it, but He'll be with you in the fire. Right? Now, verse 11. When Job's 3 friends heard of all this adversity that had come upon him, each one came from his own place. We're introduced to 3 new characters, and there's a 4th as well. But Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, who's actually the shortest man in the Bible. Bildad the Shuhite. Did you get it? That's an old joke. But Zophar the Naamathite. And there's also Elihu. So there will be 4 men around the fire, around the ashes with Job. Elihu's going to admit in verse 34, he's going to admit, you know what, I'm pretty young. And I sat quiet the whole time. I don't want to say much. But then he has this 6-chapter dissertation kind of a thing. So it's kind of funny with Elihu, but he's actually there as well. For they had made an appointment together to come and mourn with him and to comfort him. So this is, underline that, this was their goal. To mourn with him and to comfort him. When they came, imagine they're walking, they crest the hill and they see him out there far enough that they kind of recognize him and they're like, is that Job? Oh my gosh. They're kind of taken backwards a little bit like, oh, what do we get into? They raised their eyes from afar. They didn't recognize him. They lifted their voices and they wept. And each one tore his robe and sprinkled dust on his head toward heaven. So this is the form of ancient times outward mourning and grief, is tearing your robe, sprinkling dust on your head, shaving your head. It's outward mourning. So they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his grief was very great. So this gives us a little bit of insight into Job. He's saying the things, he's worshiping, but the grief is great, and it's hard to chase away. It's hard to get out of it. So for Job, it becomes this wrestling match. The guys are there for 7 days silent. I wish they could have been there another 50 days silent, because once they start talking, it's just like blah, everything comes out, and then it's like this, but you, but me, but you, but me, and it's back and forth, and it's all man's wisdom. And then they reference God and they speculate what God's doing, but none of them know. And Job is put on the defensive, and Job begins, digging in. I am just. I am upright. It wasn't anything I did. I'm not hiding anything. Like, Job, come on, Job. Nothing happens. So there's this back and forth, but it's all kind of, they're rolling the dice and guessing what it's got to be that this happened to him. Go back to James. The perseverance of Job, and you've seen the intended end by the Lord. that the Lord is very compassionate and very merciful. At the end of chapter 2, Job's grief is great. And we're left with, this is too heavy for me. I can't deal with it. But James gives us the reason we have the book is not for the first 2 chapters, but it's building to reveal the compassion and mercy of God. And His ways aren't our ways, and it's hard for us to compute. Okay, do I see it? No. When the grief is great, and the next verse, chapter 3, verse 1, Job finally opened his mouth, and he cursed the day he was born. He's totally derailed. The initial shock of the loss, the initial shock of the disease, he's on the money, but man, as time begins removing from those events, it starts to spiral him. He's going down to the pit a little bit, and he's struggling with it. And when he gets down there, these guys start jumping in with him. And they're like, there's a phrase called wind words. Wind words, there's nothing behind them. There's no truth to what they're saying. There was a missionary in China back in the 30s, and the Chinese government began spreading rumors about Christian missionaries in the hills of China. So all the little villagers started hearing these rumors that they were cannibals or whatever. And they would come to her and they would say, we're hearing wind words about you. Because they knew they weren't true. But the term, they rather than a rumor, they use the term wind words. Because there's no depth to them. And that's what happens with these guys. Going from chapter 3 to chapter 38, if you find any doctrinal arguments based in those chapters, be careful. You have to look at the context and what they're saying. And in terms of, this is why God does this, it's going to be incorrect. Because they're taking a guess. But they're not actually expositing the purposes of God correctly because He rebukes them all. Now, there are truths in those chapters, and we'll touch on them, and we'll bounce through and see some of them. But in the overall, as you begin diving in, I would encourage you to read Job, kind of begin preparing because we're going to be in it for a little bit, and get a feel for some of these passages. And you begin to see, you can distill it down where, okay, this is what they're actually saying Job said. And this is their argument against what he said. And this is Job's response to what he just said. And now they go a different tact and they're like, well, this is coming. So that's where we're going to be in the next week. But in terms of what we have right now, Job's confession in chapter 121. Is this true in your life? Can you fall in the midst of difficulty and worship Him? And can you agree with Job? It's like, well, the Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. I'm okay with it. Father filter. Nothing comes into your life that hasn't first passed through God's filter for you. He knows what you can handle. He cares for you. He is compassionate. He is merciful. So hold on to those things and be ready to worship. It's only a test. You're like a bridge. It's just a test. I have a quote from Spurgeon. Another quote. Better to be taught by suffering than to be taught by sin. Better to lie in God's dungeon than to revel in the devil's palace. Amen. I don't want to learn I made mistakes or learn hard lessons because I've fallen into sin. If it's the furnace of affliction that God tries me and proves me to be gold, He knows best. And we can leave it there, right?